Well, Mumbai has always been a city of migrants. It's a city that is built by migration. And that discourse has been very important in the 1990s when you see a shift from a cosmopolitan atmosphere in the city of Bombay towards a more regional nationalist, language nationalism kind of a politics. So much work has been done on talking about how a city of migration has shaped over a long period of time. So when we started working on this exhibition, it was clear that we were not going to take the regular history of Bombay for a conversation on migration, especially since in the last few years there has been a drop of migration in the city, and there is much more internal migration from the old cities. Actually, the south and central Bombay is the old and the industrial city, and North Bombay has been the emerging suburbs, especially since the 80s. So those were the suburbs that we took specially to study for this shifting city exhibition. And the word shifting city also emerged in this sense that the city, it's not about the changing city, but a shift in the mentality of how you approach citizenship, how you approach the idea of being a public in the city. We worked with 6 artists and 2 research projects, and one of the invited artists' work is a very old Bombay artist who actually had that sense of documenting the change of the city through its materiality. And the exhibition constantly played between various lenses of seeing people and places within the city. So what you see behind is one of the commissioned artists who has been working with documenting or drawing public spaces through people behavior. So there is very less sort of sense of space that he works, but just the nature of people and the nature of objects that he documents. And he spent about 2 months in some of the newer public spaces that we were identifying as cafes, multiplex cinemas, malls, as emerging internalized, interiorized, safe public spaces, or the imagination of secure and safe public spaces. And this documentation was important in terms of capturing materiality in architecture as well as human behavior. And to then think that what is the imagination of the public, and it's not the public square. So the entire exhibition was largely sort of designed to constantly work by looking at the very sort of texture of people and places in the city versus more blockbuster documentation of the city in large photographic representations. So from a series of sketches, we moved to a series of about 120 very small photographs that document these queer moments in the city. So it's again a photographer who has worked as a journalist and then worked on a commission from us, literally documenting like public sculpture in the city, animals in the city, inside, outside spaces, the way people are behaving, which landed up grasping not only behavior, but a material culture of the city, and how a material culture of the city shifts between the 80s to a post-liberalized Bombay in the 1990s. To that, we sort of had these large photographs that were taken of the city from one of these really like high stories, that high building, high rises that came up in the 1990s, one of the first very controversial high-rise projects. And that sort of shifted the lens also to this way of looking at the city as this beautiful object rather than encountering the street life of the city at all points in time. And this has become a reality for various corporate towers and people working in these high-rise corporate towers, where encounter to the city is always this image of the city rather than negotiating the city on a daily basis. And that also happens with multiple flyovers now crisscrossing the city. So you're constantly moving in and out of the city but not encountering the city in its everyday grain. The third commissioned artist was actually a writer who works as a journalist, and she sort of wrote these 10 retrospective newspaper columns, as if in the last 1 year she wrote these columns, which actually grasped what is this new migration, because the migrant is no longer the working class migrant working in an industry or in a small scale job, but it's the aspirational migrant who's actually coming to Bombay only to transit to a new job in Europe or in the US. So in that sense, Bombay becomes a transitional migration space, and it also becomes a space that encounters people constantly on the move rather than people coming to make home within the city. So in that sense, the two research projects that we looked at focused on the question of housing. Because, for example, at one level, there are varieties of different scales of housing that are produced, but also this relationship between ownership and rental. So this was a large housing project that happened about a year ago, and we extracted just the Bombay component. So it was a large exhibition on housing in India in the last 70 years, but just the Bombay component that we extracted from that large exhibition allowed us to look at the variety of different kinds of housing and the aspirations that go across with that housing. And this particular project that we looked at is one inner city project which actually houses largely one particular Muslim community. And that particular Muslim community also has a prophet or a pope kind of a structure. And this real estate project is generated through the religious structure. So this combination of a religious and real estate project that came about. So the exhibition constantly sort of moved between research material and artistic or poetic kind of reproductions. And it encouraged, we designed a sort of a curated library within the exhibition. The exhibition finally ends with a small extract of a German photographer who's been visiting Bombay over the last 5 years and really photographing these northern suburbs of Bombay. And the rawness of construction, as well as the sort of the glitziness of construction, is sort of beautifully captured in his work, and we just took 4 of them. The final object that came out of the exhibition was designing a book where all the material that was there in the exhibition was literally taken as raw data, and new stories about how do you talk about the city, what are the stories about the city, or how do you walk the new city, were sort of retransformed into these narratives within that book. Thank you very much. Kaiwan, Mumbai, the shifting city. So Mumbai has always been a city of migrants. It's in fact built on migration during the industrial period. But clearly there are different stories of migration coming about. And the key was to see migration in a fresher light than the 19th and 20th century imagination of migration. And also the fact that the city is shrinking in numbers, and numbers are relocating geographically in a very different way. And today the migrant is not the industrial labor or the workforce, but the migrant is actually the person working in a call center or a multinational company or corporate banking. So the profile of the migrant has changed. So these were some of the key questions we thought we should pick up when this project first came to us. Yeah. It's a city in India which has been shaped by the coming in of people. There are stories about what are native inhabitants, and that's a small number, a small history. But it's actually a city that we talk about has been shaped by the number of people coming in, the variety of people that come in. And this has constantly changed. So actually, this project and Mumbai coming together also helps us re-look at the history of Mumbai, continuing some of the older ideas, but actually looking at the older ideas in some fresh light and doing some fresh research, which may change the patterns we expect. So we expect patterns of rise in population, but that's not how it happens. Or we expect a certain pattern of working culture, and we realize working cultures are shifting, living cultures are shifting. So the last 20 years since 1990s, Mumbai has gone through a drastic shift. It's a different city since the 1990s. And that needs to be so the question of home and the question of arrival are two key questions to look at a city that has a history of about 200 years, but the last 20 years are changing it quite drastically. We started with the question of the arrival city, and we shifted it to saying that it's the arrived in city, where people come to Bombay because they feel that the moment they come to Bombay, they've sort of made it in life. So we use the word arrived in a more sort of a colloquial slang way, which says, I've arrived, I've sort of made it in life. That was a little shift we did with the key term first. And during the course of the exhibition, we shifted to this idea of the shifting city, which was not simply a question of a changing city, but two levels of shift. One is there is a certain sense of a geographical shift from the classic south and central Bombay to the new ideas of the city being shaped in the northern suburbs. And Bombay is a linear city, so we grow from south to north. And the other thing that I wanted to sort of check out closely is a shift in the mentality of what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a public person in the city of Mumbai. So the shift in your logic, the shift in your urban experience, and the shift in how you relate with other citizens, this was the shift that actually I was thinking about. So at that level, actually, it was quite interesting when we put the original material that came to us from the original exhibition and we put it on two walls. And we had sort of the Bombay story coming about in roughly 8 projects. It was interesting to see how, you know, the original exhibition had these questions and how some of these questions were either having a history in Mumbai or they were asking of a new history in Mumbai. So whether it was the question of housing, whether it's the question of how you mix a local economy with a certain neighborhood concept, how do you handle housing, how do you handle how people meet each other, the question of strangers in the city. So what we felt is that the questions that were raised there had a certain history already in Mumbai, and that's a kind of cross learning or a cross exchange would have been interesting. And anyways, I think today it becomes extremely important to understand that all locations, especially places like Bombay, they are as much global as much they are local. Nothing can happen in Mumbai outside the global economy in that sense. And at the same time, there is a strong pressure of what we call a locality or a local culture or a language. So this is the reality of metropolises, I believe, in most parts of the world today. So that way, these collaborations are important reflections. So this exhibition, The Shifting City, got very good reception. A very different generation of people also got attracted to the exhibition. One thing that I did, which was partly conscious as a curator, the 3 artists I invited to develop work for this exhibition are from the same age bracket as mine. So I selected a certain age bracket, which all of us are born somewhere around 75 to 80. 1975 to 1980. So we belong to a certain generation that has seen life in the 1980s in Mumbai. And as a working professional, we are experiencing a new life in Mumbai in the 2000s. So we all had a certain biographical as well as a professional or an artistic response to the city. And that, I think, corresponded with a good generation size, a generation that is us, but also a much younger generation from us, responded to some of the work that was produced in the exhibition. And the other thing was a shift of the gear from the classic study of the old city or the central city or the mill workers city to the suburbs, where yet we don't have very clear frameworks of studying the suburbs. And some of the Shifting City projected the possibility of a framework to study the suburbs and see the suburbs as changing the city rather than the old or the industrial city making an impact to the modern city or the contemporary city.